when we first started talking about this episode, we were talking about just the book, but also since I'm writing a series, you write a series. Um, you kind of create an arc over all the books, right? Um, and a thing that I think is a good thing to apply when you're building your character arc is looking at how your characters grow and change because of what they learn, right? I've done this in this scenario, so how would I change it in this scenario?
Hey, this is Writer's Row. I'm DC Wright-Hammer.
And I'm David Gane.
And if you like the content we've been putting out on YouTube and on various podcasts, make sure to subscribe. If you're on the YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up and make sure to comment down below. And if you haven't hidden, that's not a real word, but if you haven't hit the notification bell, please do that now. That will alert you when we release new videos.
Anything that you just said, I've got my underground snorting in the background. Underground, I don't know. This is going to be this kind of a show, isn't it? Hey, DC, what are we going to talk about today?
I'm glad you asked, David. On this episode that is not going to be a train wreck, I would like to talk about the literary concept. Look at how grandiose I'm trying to get with this, of character arcs. I think it's something that, especially early on in my writing career, I took for granted. And I feel like I have handled them well, but I don't feel like I had good grounding on handling my character arcs. I just kind of went with it. My editor kept me honest. And so we wanted to spend an episode talking about number one, what are character arcs and how should they come out in our writing? And as I mentioned before the show, I've got a couple curveballs for you that I'm gonna just leave spoiler free for right now. So the open-ended question to start the show is, David, what do you think character arcs are from a writing perspective?
Man, that's the biggest curveball. I wasn't expecting this. I have no clue, DC.
Yep.
That's the end of the show. Um, I actually told you I really had to put a bit of thought into this beforehand because I really don't think about it maybe enough. Um, for me, I will always say that character is about change, whether positive or negative. And I also believe that characters are often trying to respond to change. Most of the time, actually, you know what? Yeah, they're always dealing with change, whether they want to stay in a stable situation and then change comes into their lives and they have to deal with it, or they want to change and grow and stuff like that. But for the character arc, are you thinking one book or a couple of books?
Well, I think
Both?
the to some extent, yeah, both
Okay.
because you're telling a story in every book, you have a beginning, middle, and end, and the character is part of that.
Yeah.
Especially with what you and I write, we write character-driven stories, and so I guess you can talk about it from an individual book perspective, and then I think that has to play into, if you are writing a series, it's something that you have to consider along the way.
I like how you tried to like say we're writing character driven stories because you know that I totally think the character and plot are the same thing. So actually there is one argument in my head that I don't want to really get into, but there is a different definition of plot that I don't think gets spoken enough and about enough, which is more of the like the critical literature study of it. But let's skip over that because most people, when they talk about plot, they talk about just the story and not plot and what it specifically is. Um, but yes, I do believe in character arc, but that was not your question. It's the growth and change of your character over the book or over the series, how they develop and grow, whether it's a positive or a negative. There, I finally gave you an answer, DC.
You're usually bad about defining things, so thank
That
you.
was a fantastic definition, I'm just saying.
5 minutes in, I appreciate that you finally got around to it. So yeah, I think when you're talking about characters arcing, like you think of the geometric shape of an arc, somewhat. Is it a parabola? Is that right? Basically, it's the for people who can see, it's the going up of kind of the rising up or rising down, as we talked about, of the character, arcing to a point that the story has taken them. And we talked about character development in other episodes where you've got the character, you've got their objective, and then you've got the obstacles in between them and their objective. And working that out is hopefully how you start to get them closer to, or you're taking them step by step to something new or different that challenges their character and makes them respond, right? So I'm trying to think of an example.
I was thinking it through as you were saying it, but continue on. You're trying to think of an example of what?
Well, so I won't give away too many spoilers, the book Ready Player One. And the synopsis for that is a rich guy that owns this virtual reality, the most played game in the world, passes away, and he hides 3 Easter eggs in the game. And the person that in the virtual world finds these 3 Easter eggs inherits the company that runs this virtual reality gaming platform that is super profitable, super rich. Basically, it means that you're going to become one of the richest people in the world overnight. So your character in that is just a young man who has played this game, and then he hears about this sort of contest, and he jumps right in, and he starts from nothing. And so you see him going through that whole process of going from a nobody to being somebody who's competing in this challenge. And
Okay.
as a reader, and I have seen the movie, but as a reader, like it feels like you are going with, like, again, this is a character-driven story, separate from plot, which we can talk about. But you feel like you're going on this journey with them, and you feel like once you've established who they are, then the story can challenge that. And then the fun part is, how do they respond? Like, how is that character arcing? How is that character changing? And do they do things you don't expect? Do they get changed in a way, physically, emotionally, and mentally, that you didn't expect, or that is surprising? How are they handling this character dealing with the obstacles that are in the way of them attaining the goal or the objective that has been placed in front of them?
Okay, so I'm not sure how you connected this to Ready Player One. Did you finish it off?
Well, I wanted to use an example.
Okay, can I give you 2 better examples?
Of course, you can give me better examples, David.
Because they're really, really apparent. Let's go with Breaking Bad, because I don't think I'm giving any spoilers. The character arc of Walter White is watching this guy who's a scientist or not a scientist, a science teacher, and who does chemistry and is somewhat meek, slowly grow into, the drug kingpin. So there's who he is as that human being, but also you see his descent into questionable choices over and over again, right? So I think that's a much better version of the negative character arc. And then I'm going to give you a positive character arc, which is Shrek from the movie Shrek,
Okay.
which is he is just an ogre. He wants to live in a swamp. And I like this one also because it's a really tight example of that change, which is he wants to live in the swamp, and that's all he wants, and he wants to be left alone. So when he sets out on his journey at the start of the movie to get all the fairy tale creatures out of his swamp, he his intended goal is just to be able to get them out and return to his swamp. And along the way, he actually steps up and becomes a hero, and people embrace him and like him for that. And he kind of learns to allow people into his life and into his world, right? So he really does go through a much bigger change and a bigger growth where he, and I know I'm celebrating Shrek for this, but yeah, like he becomes a much better ogre by the end of that story. And you kind of already touched in on how people grow and how people change, whether it's I say grow, but there's also the descent that we can also talk about. But it's that idea that okay, we've got this. This is who we are. This is our want. This is our obstacle. We want to get the fairy tale creatures out of your swamp so that you can be alone. The obstacle is that, well, in the main thing is the obstacle are the fairy tale creatures. His want is to just be left alone. So he goes off on his journey, and he consistently is challenged to have to make decisions. So if his decision is always to be left alone, he's constantly given challenges where he has to work with others to be able to get the goal, and then that slowly opens them up to make different choices. I always say with my students that when you're writing a character is often our wants and our actions and our responses to the world, right? We want, I don't know, let's say we'll go with my favorite example I always use, which is we have two characters who want money. One goes and does a 9 to 5 job. The other one goes and robs a bank. Those two different wants immediately define your character. Then let's go with the one that robs the bank. One could go in there guns blazing, shoot everyone, everything like that. And then another one can be without any force, fires the gun up in the air and doesn't want to hurt anyone. You're again defining these two different pathways through their actions. And then, what if somebody comes along and punches them in the face, and suddenly the guy who is all threatening runs away because he's scared or whatever? That defines his character a lot more, or defines his character again. And all these choices, all these actions, all these wants are all definitions of them. And we see growth and change in the character when one of those things shift. Either their want shifts, their action shifts, or their response shift from what they typically do, the static thing that they've been doing up to this point. So in the Shrek example, he's constantly forced to make a choice that's outside of his character, but in doing it, he grows and realizes he needs that help, and he needs to work with people to get the things that he kind of wants. So
I'm going to have to put that there's a lot of Shrek spoilers in this episode.
What is it? It's a 20-year-old movie, I think.
Is that the statute of limitation on spoilers? I'm just saying. That's why
I didn't tell you how that thing ends or anything.
Well,
I just said he has to grow as an ogre.
You said in the end he's a better ogre. Come on now, we already know where it's going.
Okay, fine.
But I think it's interesting the example you gave about needing money, and it's funny. Robbing a bank or working a 9 to 5 can actually be at the beginning to establish the status quo of a character. Or if we've been leading up to a bank robbery the whole time, it can be, in fact, the moment of arc for those characters. Or the person who's been working a 9 to 5 job the whole entire book or novel, and then they finally quit their job because they're tired of dealing with whatever at the job, even though they need money, and it's become, very obvious that this is the job, whatever it is, and they don't have a plan, but it's sort of them saying, that's it, I'm done, or something like that. And so, establishing a character and then that's basically giving you point A, in the first several chapters of a book, and then where do they go from there? Up, down, and then the curveball that I kept talking about is the flat arc, actually, which is something that I've recently really kind of delved into a little more, and that's where a character resists change the entire story. In fact, they don't go up or down. And what's interesting about that is the stories are typically less about being driven by the character, and it's really the reader seeing the struggle between the plot and the character, basically not changing the character. So the obstacles they refuse to acknowledge, they refuse to deal, they refuse to.
Okay, I'll go with that. I see that part. Okay.
And so they, instead of interacting, they are refusing to move forward. They are sticking to their guns. They are not. They are, instead of actively fighting to alleviate obstacles, they are avoiding. They are trying not to be changed. They are trying to stay the exact same. And writing a flat arc, I think, is tough. I don't have any good examples in my head, but um, basically doing that kind of writing, I think, is very interesting because you in today's TV oriented, character driven type, people love those kind of stories where it's very much dialogue driven, it's very much action driven and things like that. When you've got somebody who's resisting, the plot essentially to some extent, that you have to be very good about making that interesting, because normally we're looking for character development. Normally we're looking for somebody who's a curmudgeon to become happy by the end, or somebody who's happy becoming jaded at the end. We want to see change, and that's part of the experience of reading these stories. And so having a main character especially, who is essentially the same from beginning to end, I think it's very difficult to write, but I think it can be compelling if it's done well.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my I don't like separating plot and character because to me I will always say that they're the same thing. Um, I'm trying to remember the name. It was a film directed by Catherine Bigelow, Oscar nominated. It was the one before she did Zero Dark 30 about the bomb guy. He diffuses bombs, and it's totally blanking on me. Maybe we'll remember it. But that was a good example of a story about a character struggling with the world changing around him and him trying to take control of things, and ending up kind of back in the same place that he began, which is, yeah. I'm not gonna spoil that one, but um, uh, it's a good example of something we haven't really talked about in this thing, is your beginnings and your endings of books, because that one starts with the opening shot is him walking into something, and the final shot is him walking into the exact same thing. Like, it's pretty well kind of a similar idea, right?
Is it the Hurt Locker? Is that
Hurt Locker? There we go. Thank you, DC. You're fantastic. I'm gonna give you a check mark on that one.
Okay, I thought it was, but I actually haven't seen the movie, but I figured I would name drop. So, all right, I've been productive tonight. Go on.
So, anyways, that one is a lot about him trying to make change and make things happen and get results, but consistently struggling with that. So, and I always like those because it's less about change, and it's more about kind of doing a character study of this person, right? And in that one, I think the character study becomes a metaphor of other things for that story. The other, this is an old movie called Carnal Knowledge with Jack Nicholson, and that's another example, which is really just a character study of this man who doesn't understand. He basically ruins his relationships that he gets himself into. Like, he wants a relationship. He says he wants to be in a relationship, but he consistently ruins the relationships that he's into. So it's from the 60s. And back then, they were doing a lot of those character studies, those kind of type of stories. But yeah, I like them. I've never ever wanted to write one, but I've always been curious about writing one just to see, you know, do the
Well,
experience of writing it. But
yeah, and I think well written stories or well told stories are going to draw out and make the viewer or reader believe that there's going to be change. In fact, hope, almost be a cheerleader for that change because the character, they've invested the time and energy to be part of this story. They've taken it to this extreme. There's an opportunity for this person to change, and they want a payoff. And in the end, when, if it's an example like you were giving, where somebody that continually ruins relationships and they have a chance for true love and they're going to get it, and all they got to do is say yes, and they're just too stubborn, or they're just, maybe they don't even get it. Maybe they didn't realize it, even though it was apparent to the reader or the viewer. And they pass up the opportunity. And that very human feeling of emptiness that you get from the lack of change, I think is actually very rewarding to some extent. It reminds us that there's not always happy endings or satisfying endings, and that some things and some people and some things just don't work themselves out, and we have to kind of deal with it. And that might be tough for people who are experiencing some things in their personal life. And if they're reading something like that, they might give it a poor review because they're like, screw this. This is too real for me. But I always have, a quote unquote bad ending, basically an ending where things don't happen all nicely and work themselves out. I usually have a fond memory of those. I usually cherish those because done well, they really capture and they give you sort of a glimpse of realism that you don't always get from, especially big budget media, big budget movies and things like that, and really hyped novels and things like that. People want to appeal to a mass audience, so they want to give a happy ending a lot of times. And having sort of these unsettling endings where the character, again, you're like, well, what did I just read all that for? There was no beginning, middle, and end. They were literally the same person from the beginning to the end. I just experienced a slice of that. And in the end, they still made a bad decision. But I think it's the lead up to that. It's the crescendo, the climax leading up to that, that really makes you think something different is going to happen. And then the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, and you have to be very, very skilled at doing that. You have to delay that gratification enough and give them that fork in the road where they really think it's going to go one way and it goes the other. And those kinds of payoffs are really huge for me. Like I don't know. They just have a place in my heart. Those kinds of stories.
so I I feel like if I guess my thing is that I don't know if you should. I don't know if I would write it the way you described you would write it. I would not. I would. I wouldn't be thinking about delay and that kind of thing. I would be looking as, you know, who this character is. You're defining it, and you keep on basically defining situations, and you're trying to put your character into situations and say, okay, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to try and give you the thing that you want, right? And or put you into a situation, not even give you the thing that you want, but put you into a situation that's going to test basically the hypothesis of will you grow, will you change, will you become a better person? And then you're going to confound me as a character constantly, right? That's the way I would probably approach it. Um, and bringing it back to, their wants, their obstacles, their actions or responses, and always like, why is it that you keep doing this thing? And I would keep asking that and saying, okay, if that's what it is, if this is what you're telling me, then let's give you that situation, and then you prove me wrong. So then I guess what I wouldn't approach it as like the tension of it, because I think by just trying to give that character the thing and have, the world respond by trying to help give that thing to the character, and then they continually say no to this thing, then, I as a reader, I would be totally invested because you want them to make that choice, right? To say, okay, no, I can be a better person, or I can do whatever. Even in the when you're talking about the flat, even the negative ones, like you have this opportunity to, I everyone or for me, I'm gonna say for me, when I was watching Breaking Bad, I was always like, I want Walter to get out of the nosedive that he's in, right? And you're always hoping for some little bit of redemption. So I think, yeah, I think that's how I would approach it differently than you.
Yeah, and I'd say you're wrong. Um, no, I would say we disagree on that, and I would say partly because um, I think you can give them scenarios over and over proving that the character is who they are. But I think in the way I prefer stories and the way I write myself is, especially if you give me two or three examples, if you're going to give me a fourth example, there needs to be something special about it. There needs to be something that basically, um, like I was saying, draws out or really sets up, like, because otherwise it becomes a broken record. It becomes, well, I know
Oh
how to.
no, I'm not saying that you do a repetition over and over again. No, you gotta, inside of that, you still have to grow it and change it and shape it. You can't go repeating the exact same thing in
Right.
each of these scenarios, and you can't go backwards in each of these scenarios.
Right. So if your character isn't changing in the flat arc, then the world needs to be changing around them, and the whole heart of your story is that struggle between the change around the character and them trying to stay static, trying to stay unchanged by the things around them, and to being defiant um and that's why I think if you can basically give this character all these attributes that are supposed to stay static, and then you set up your plot and your their the where they should arc as a character, basically your climax, and you strip away everything. You take away all of their excuses. You take away um, all of the things that should make it obvious that they need to go one direction, or maybe two or three good directions, and they refuse it, and maybe they don't even make a bad choice. They just make the same choice and they stick to their guns, and that can still have a pretty profound effect on people. And I do think that, yeah, can that be done quickly? Can that be wrapped up relatively quickly? Maybe, but I feel like a lot of it is giving the reader something, um, giving them that little bit of moment where they really doubt, and they're like, okay, this character has proven time and time again this is who they are, but I'm not so sure. They might actually choose the right path here, and then pulling that out, like I said, pulling that rug out from underneath them. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was saying. Whereas you're saying, and I won't put words into your mouth. You're saying
I'm
that,
waiting for you to tell me what I'm saying.
well, no, I'll leave it at that. I don't have to say what you're saying.
um, and then the other thing that I kind of liked what you're talking about, or I don't know if you were talking about it. I don't know. Somewhere along the lines, we kind of touched upon this idea, um, which was when we first started talking about this episode. We were talking about just the book, but also since I'm writing a series, you write a series. Um, you, you kind of create an arc over all the books, right? Um, and a thing that I think is a good thing to apply when you're building your character arc is looking at how your characters grow and change because of what they learn, right? I've done this in this scenario, so how would I change it in this scenario? Um, if if I do X, Y, and Z, I get Q.
Mhm.
So if I need to not get Q again, then I need to do X, Y, and A or whatever, right?
A lot of
It's
letters.
I know it's so complicated. It got I knew it as soon as I started saying it. I'm in my character arc of this writer's row. The next episode, I'll try not to use so many
Yeah.
letters. Does that's a much better example of
Well, but I think you can do so. What's nice about a series, I mean, you can do this in a book too, but in a series, you can have multiple character arcs. You can have a sort of ebb and flow of character arcs where in one novel that they triumph and then they come crashing down in the following novel, and then part of the series is working itself out about how do they reinvent themselves after that, and how is it similar to the way they rose in the past, and how is it different from the way they rose in the past. And so I think that's the nice thing about a series. If you can write one and you can get a reader base into it, and basically using, having your characters not steadily, ascend, and because to me that gets a little boring over 3, 4, 5 books where you've got the same character getting better and stronger and overcoming everything. It becomes very predictable, and having a book or two in a series that lets them fall from grace, lets them maybe start from nothing or start in a very similar, to where they came from, and how are they going to respond differently this time. I think that can be very compelling, and very creative in the way you handle that, because I think that my series, and I won't spoil it. People say that I spoil my novels in these episodes, but I try to use
always.
that. Right. Well, it's, they have to read it anyway if they want to know it's truly a spoiler. Link in the description down below. But no, like that brings depth to a series, and so arcing can go up and down, and especially over multiple books with the same characters, it should go up and down in my opinion. If you're constantly going up or constantly going down, or yeah, if you're going to do a series with a flat arc the entire time, you got to make it pretty compelling.
A 7 book series with a flat arc. It is going to be fantastic.
Hey, I bet you it's out there. We just have to do our research and figure it out. And if it's not, someone needs to write it. I could see it being a comedy. I could see it being like, I don't know, The Big Lebowski. Basically, how he's the dude in the beginning and he's the dude at the end. But the whole thing, the whole experience throughout is all this crazy stuff happening. And he just really wants his White Russian, and he just wants to mellow out. And
Does he grow though?
does he? He's the dude.
I know, but he can still grow as the dude.
Did he grow?
I don't know. I'd have to go back. It's been so long since I've watched it. So there we go.
Yeah. So with comedies, people who make funny decisions all the time, I think you might be able to get away with that, because every book you can put them in a funnier situation, and how they remain the same and stick to their guns, but their guns aren't like, life altering or peril isn't around the corner and they can just still be their goofy self, but how are they going to be goofy this time? I could see that being entertaining
I
uh,
think it would run
in a
its
series.
its course though, and you would it'd be diminishing returns on that one.
Well, I think you wouldn't like it, but I think there's a market for that. And I would watch a Big Lebowski too. I'm just saying, if they made it, I would probably watch
I'm
it.
just saying oh no, like I'm that's fine. It's more the, you know, there's the comedy like I don't know, there's the comedy act where it's the same shtick, right? They're playing character, but they're not playing character that grows or changes. So
Right.
yeah,
Mr. Bean.
precisely. But
Okay.
he keeps them quick and tight and everything, and
And they
paces them out over many, many, many years. So, anyways, can we move on?
we can not only move on, but it's probably a good place to wrap up. We've
Okay.
arced as much as we can arc.
All
Uh,
right.
what do you got to hawk this time, David?
You know what? The same old stuff.
Yeah?
I'm as a character, I'm not growing and I'm not changing. I would really like it if people would go to our website, sign up for our newsletter,
What website?
kunyosandgain.com. Links are down below. We send out a monthly newsletter, uh, and very like not I don't know. It's a nice balance in my mind. We give you a bit of like an update from Kunyos and Gane. We share some stuff of what we liked. We always throw a recipe in there right now.
Interesting.
Give you updates about the book, the book, everything like that. Um, and hopefully we'll keep on adding to it. I think it's growing and changing. There's a character arc to our newsletter. All right.
Very topical, David.
Yes, always. Okay,
And
what about you?
Well, and I'm just going to keep pushing. We are now on podcasts. So sitting down and watching a YouTube channel or putting it in a separate tab to hear our voices, that definitely works, and we appreciate those who have subscribed and that do that. But if you want to take us on the go, if you want episodes to come to your pocket in your phone, I think we have 7 or 8 episodes, 9 episodes since this one aired on podcast. I'm going to keep getting some of the older content out there because I think we got a lot of good stuff that people haven't seen, watched, or heard. But yeah, definitely subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. Those are our major platforms. We're on several minor platforms as well. And we're just going to try to move that forward too. So, um,
And can I actually just throw out leave a comment down below if you like watching it on YouTube, or send us a message on Twitter. Just say you like it as a podcast, you like it on YouTube, those kind of things. I'm really curious to find out where people really like watching us, hearing us, that kind of stuff.
yep. And we just appreciate everybody's support. And anybody who's watched this long, we'll catch you next time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.